The acrid stench of fear permeated the air, mingling with the musty odor of decay that seemed to seep from the very walls of the abandoned factory. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat a deafening drum in the eerie silence. I pressed my back against the cold, rusted metal of an ancient machine, praying that the shadows would conceal me from the monster that stalked these forsaken halls. A low, guttural growl echoed through the cavernous space, sending shivers down my spine. It was close, too close. I held my breath, afraid that even the slightest sound would betray my location. How did I end up here? How did this night of urban exploration turn into a fight for survival against a creature I'd always believed to be nothing more than a myth? My name is David, and just hours ago, I was an ordinary 36-year-old man with a boring office job and a penchant for exploring the abandoned ruins of Detroit. Now I'm trapped in a nightmare, hunted by a beast that shouldn't exist, desperately trying to survive until dawn. It all started when I decided to explore the old Packard automotive plant on the east side of Detroit. The sprawling complex had always fascinated me, its decaying grandeur a testament to the city's faded glory. I'd explored parts of it before, but tonight I wanted to delve deeper, to uncover its hidden secrets. As I made my way through the labyrinthine corridors, the beam of my flashlight casting long, distorted shadows on the graffiti-covered walls, I heard something that made me freeze in my tracks. It was a sound unlike anything I'd ever heard before, a cross between a wolf's howl and a human scream. It echoed through the empty halls, raising the hair on the back of my neck. Curiosity warred with caution. The rational part of my brain urged me to turn back, to leave this godforsaken place and never return. But another part, the part that had always pushed me to explore the unknown, compelled me to investigate. I crept forward, my footsteps muffled by years of accumulated dust and debris. The sound came again, closer this time, followed by a series of wet, tearing noises that turned my stomach. I rounded a corner and immediately wished I hadn't. There, in a shaft of moonlight streaming through a broken window, stood a creature straight out of my darkest nightmares. It was massive, easily 7 feet tall, with a body that seemed to be a horrific fusion of man and wolf. Coarse, matted fur covered its muscular frame, and its hands ended in razor-sharp claws that glinted in the pale light. But it was the creature's face that truly paralyzed me with terror. It had the elongated snout of a wolf, filled with teeth that looked capable of tearing through steel. Yet its eyes, God, its eyes were terrifyingly human, gleaming with an intelligence that had no place in a bestial face. The creature was hunched over something, and with a jolt of horror, I realized it was the mangled remains of what had once been a person. Blood dripped from its muzzle as it raised its head, those two human eyes locking onto mine. For a moment, time stood still. Then with a roar that shook dust from the ceiling, the monster lunged towards me. Primal fear jolted me into action, and I turned and ran, my heart threatening to burst from my chest. I sprinted through the dark corridors, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly as I desperately sought an escape route. Behind me, I could hear the creature's pursuit, its claws scrabbling against concrete, its bestial pants growing ever closer. I burst through a rusted door, finding myself in what must have once been an assembly line. Ancient machinery loomed in the darkness like sleeping giants. Without thinking, I dove behind one of the massive contraptions, pressing myself into the narrowest gap I could find. And that's where I am now, huddled in the dark, trying to control my ragged breathing as I listen for any sign of the monster. The silence stretches on, broken only by the occasional distant sound of metal groaning in the wind. Just as I begin to think that perhaps I've lost it, that maybe I can make a break for the exit, I hear it, the soft pad of paws on concrete drawing nearer. My muscles tense, ready to run, but I know deep down that it's futile. This thing, this werewolf, is faster, stronger, and knows this place far better than I do. A low, rumbling growl reaches my ears, and I can smell its fetid breath. It's toying with me, I realize. It knows exactly where I am, and it's savoring the hunt. Tears of terror and frustration sting my eyes. Is this how it ends? Am I to become just another victim, another set of bones scattered among the ruins of this once great city? Number I refuse to accept that fate. Slowly, carefully, I reach into my pocket, my fingers closing around the small canister of pepper spray I always carry for protection. It seems laughably inadequate against this supernatural threat, but it's all I have. The werewolf's growl intensifies, and I can hear its claws scraping against the metal of my hiding place. It's about to make its move. I tense, ready to fight with everything I have, even though I know it's hopeless. Suddenly, a new sound cuts through the night, distant sirens growing louder by the second. The creature pauses, its growl turning into a frustrated snarl. For a moment, nothing moves. Then, with a howl that chills me to my very core, I hear it bound away, its heavy footfalls receding into the distance. I remain frozen in place, hardly daring to breathe. Minutes pass, feeling like hours, until finally I see flashlight beams cutting through the darkness. Voices call out, human voices. I want to respond, to cry out for help, but my voice seems stuck in my throat. Finally, mustering every ounce of courage I have left, I crawl out from my hiding place. "Here!" I manage to croak. "I'm here!" The beams swing in my direction, momentarily blinding me. "We've got a live one!" someone shouts, and suddenly I'm surrounded by police officers, their faces a mixture of concern and confusion. "Sir, are you all right?" one of them asks, helping me to my feet. "We got reports of strange noises and possible gunshots in this area." I open my mouth, then close it again. How can I possibly explain what I've just experienced? Who would believe me? I got lost, I stammer. Thought I heard something scary, probably just the wind. The officer nods, though I can see the skepticism in his eyes. "This is no place to be wandering around at night, sir. Let's get you out of here." As they lead me out of the building, I can't help but look back over my shoulder. In the shadows of an upper floor, I catch a glimpse of something moving, something large with eyes that glow in the darkness. A chill runs down my spine, and I hurry to keep up with the officers. The cool night air hits me as we exit the building, and I gulp it down gratefully. But even as relief floods through me, a new fear takes hold. Because I know now that the stories are true. Monsters are real, and one of them is stalking the abandoned streets of Detroit. As I'm guided to a waiting ambulance for a checkup, my mind races. Should I tell them what I saw? Would anyone believe me? Or would I be dismissed as another crazy person, maybe even locked up in a psychiatric ward? No, I decide. For now, I'll keep this to myself. But I know I can't just let it go. That thing is still out there, hunting in the shadows of this decaying city. And somehow, some way, I need to find a way to stop it. The paramedic shines a light in my eyes, checking for signs of concussion. "You're lucky," she says. "Whatever happened in there, you got out without a scratch." I nod numbly, but I know the truth. The real wounds aren't physical. They're etched into my mind, into my very soul, because now I know what lurks in the darkness, and I can never unknow it. As the ambulance doors close and we pull away from the Packard plant, I make a silent vow. I will find a way to end this terror. I will stop the Werewolf of Detroit, no matter what it takes. Because if I don't, who will? The city lights blur past the window, but I barely notice them. My mind is already racing, planning my next move, because I know now that my ordinary life is over. From this night forward, I'm a hunter, pursuing a monster that most people don't even believe exists. And so begins my quest, my obsession. The night I came face to face with the Werewolf of Detroit was just the beginning. Little did I know how deep this rabbit hole would go, or how it would change me forever. In the days that followed my terrifying encounter, I tried to convince myself that it had all been a hallucination, a product of fear and an overactive imagination. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw those glowing, intelligent eyes, heard that bone-chilling howl. No, it had been real, all too real. I threw myself into research, scouring the internet for any information I could find on werewolves. Most of what I found was clearly fiction, but here and there, buried in obscure forums and ancient folklore, I began to piece together a picture that chilled me to the bone. Werewolves, it seemed, were not just mindless beasts. They retained their human intelligence, making them far more dangerous than any normal predator. They were stronger, faster, and more resilient than any human could hope to be. And worst of all, They were driven by an insatiable hunger for human flesh. But my research also gave me hope. There were weaknesses, vulnerabilities that I might be able to exploit. Silver, of course, was mentioned in almost every source. But there were other things too. Certain herbs that were said to repel them, rituals that could supposedly cure the curse. I began to prepare myself, both mentally and physically. I started working out, pushing my body to its limits. I took self-defense classes, learning how to fight even though I knew I could never match a werewolf's strength. I bought silver, coins, jewelry, anything I could get my hands on. I even managed to get a local metalworker to fashion me a set of silver-tipped arrows, though I had to lie about why I wanted them. All the while, I kept a close eye on the news. I scoured local papers and news sites for any reports of animal attacks, of bodies found mauled or partially eaten. To my horror, I found more than I expected. The stories were always explained away. Wild dogs, maybe a coyote that had wandered into the city. But I knew the truth. Weeks passed, and I found myself drawn back to the abandoned areas of Detroit. I told myself I was just scouting, trying to understand the creature's hunting grounds. But deep down, I knew I was hoping for another encounter. I needed to face this thing again, to prove to myself that I wasn't crazy. It was on one of these excursions, about a month after my first encounter, that I had my second brush with the werewolf. I was exploring an old warehouse near the river, my silver knife clutched tightly in my hand, when I heard it, that same low, rumbling growl that had haunted my nightmares. I spun around, my heart pounding in my chest. There, at the far end of the warehouse, stood the creature. It was just as massive, just as terrifying as I remembered, but this time I was prepared, or so I thought. I raised my knife, trying to steady my shaking hand. "Come on, you bastard," I muttered. "Let's end this." The werewolf's lips curled back in what could only be described as a grin, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth. And then, to my utter shock, it spoke. "Foolish human," it growled, its voice a guttural parody of speech. "You think you can hunt me? I am the hunter here." I stumbled backward, my mind reeling. It could talk. It could reason. This wasn't just some animal. This was something far worse. The creature advanced slowly, savoring my fear. "I remember your scent," it continued. "You're the one that got away, but not this time. This time, you're mine." I knew I should run, but my legs wouldn't move. I was frozen in place, mesmerized by the horrific sight before me. The werewolf crouched, ready to pounce, and I knew that in seconds it would all be over. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. Just as the creature tensed to leap, a deafening crash echoed through the warehouse. Part of the old roof had collapsed, sending a shower of debris raining down between us. The werewolf snarled in frustration, momentarily distracted. It was the opening I needed. I turned and ran, my feet pounding against the concrete floor. Behind me, I could hear the creature's roar of rage, followed by the sound of pursuit. I burst out of the warehouse, gasping for air. The night was dark, a thin sliver of moon providing barely enough light to see by. I sprinted down the empty street, knowing that every second counted. I could hear the werewolf behind me, its powerful strides eating up the distance between us. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I pushed on, driven by pure terror. Ahead I saw salvation, an old church, its doors chained shut but its windows dark and empty. Without thinking, I veered towards it, praying that the old tales about hallowed ground repelling evil were true. I crashed through a window, feeling glass cut into my arms as I tumbled to the floor. I scrambled to my feet, spinning around to face the opening, my silver knife held out before me. The werewolf appeared at the window, its massive form silhouetted against the night sky. It snarled, revealing those terrible teeth, but it didn't enter. Instead, it paced back and forth, like a caged animal. "You can't hide in there forever," it growled. "And when you come out, I'll be waiting." "You're mine, David. You've always been mine." A chill ran down my spine. It knew my name. How could it know my name? The creature's eyes locked with mine, and in that moment, I saw something that shook me to my core. There was recognition there, a flicker of something almost human, and then it was gone. The werewolf turned and loped away, disappearing into the shadows of the abandoned city. I slumped against the wall, my heart still racing. I was alive, but I knew this was far from over. The werewolf was right. I couldn't hide forever. And now it seemed the stakes were even higher than I'd realized. This wasn't just about survival anymore. There was a mystery here, a connection between me and this creature that I didn't understand. And somehow I knew that unraveling that mystery was the key to ending this nightmare once and for all. As I sat there in the dusty old church, surrounded by the faint scent of incense and the whisper of long-forgotten prayers, I made a decision. I would solve this mystery. I would find out why this creature knew my name, why it seemed to be fixated on me, and then I would end it. Little did I know, my journey into the heart of darkness was only just beginning. The following days were a blur of frantic research and sleepless nights. I pored over every scrap of information I could find about werewolves, local history, and the abandoned areas of Detroit. I was convinced that there had to be a connection, some reason why this creature was here, in this city, and why it seemed to know me. My obsession began to take its toll. I called in sick to work, ignoring the concerned messages from my boss and coworkers. I barely ate, barely slept. Every shadow made me jump. Every unexpected sound sent my heart racing. I was becoming a paranoid wreck, but I couldn't stop. The need to understand, to find answers, drove me relentlessly forward. It was during one of my late-night research sessions that I stumbled upon something that made my blood run cold. I was digging through old newspaper archives, looking for any strange occurrences or unexplained deaths in Detroit's history, when I found an article from 1986. The headline read, "Local Family Massacred in Home, Police Baffled." As I read on, the details of the case sent shivers down my spine. A family of 4 had been found brutally murdered in their home on the outskirts of Detroit. The parents and older child had been torn apart, their bodies mutilated in a way that the article described as animalistic. But the youngest child, a baby boy, had been found unharmed in his crib. The baby's name was David Carter. My name. I stared at the screen, my mind reeling. Could this be a coincidence? Or was this the connection I had been searching for? With shaking hands, I dug deeper. I found more articles about the case, about how the police had never found the killer, about how the baby, me, had been placed in foster care, eventually adopted by a loving family who had given me their name. Memories began to surface, fragments of conversations overheard as a child. I had always known I was adopted, but my parents had never told me the full story. Now I understood why, but this revelation only raised more questions. If I was that baby, if my biological family had been killed by what I now suspected was the werewolf, why had it spared me? And why, after all these years, was it hunting me now? I needed answers, and I knew I wouldn't find them sitting in front of a computer. I had to go back to where it all began, the house where my biological family had been murdered. The next day, I drove to the outskirts of Detroit, to a neighborhood that had once been a thriving suburb, but was now largely abandoned. The house was easy to find. It stood out among the other decaying buildings, a dark blot on the landscape that even nature seemed reluctant to reclaim. As I stood before the dilapidated structure, a sense of dread washed over me. This was where my life had changed forever, where a monster had torn apart my family. And now, decades later, I was willingly walking back into its lair. With a deep breath, I pushed open the creaking door and stepped inside. The interior was a mess of decay and neglect. Graffiti covered the walls, trash littered the floor, and the air was thick with the musty smell of abandonment. I moved through the room slowly, my flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. In what must have once been the living room, I paused. Despite the years of decay, I could almost see the scene as it must have been that night. The family gathered together, unaware of the horror that was about to descend upon them. As I turned to leave the room, something caught my eye. There, partially hidden beneath a fallen piece of drywall, was a glint of metal. I knelt down, pushing aside the debris, and found myself staring at an old locket. With trembling fingers, I picked it up. It was tarnished and dented, but when I managed to pry it open, I found a small photograph inside. It showed a smiling couple holding a baby, my biological parents and me. Tears stung my eyes as I looked at their faces for the first time. They seemed so happy, so unaware of the fate that awaited them. I clutched the locket to my chest, feeling a connection to my past that I had never experienced before. But my moment of reflection was shattered by a sound that made my blood run cold. A low, rumbling growl coming from somewhere in the house. I spun around, my heart pounding. The beam of my flashlight danced wildly across the room, searching for the source of the sound. And then I saw it, a pair of glowing eyes in the doorway, watching me with predatory intensity. "So," the werewolf growled, its massive form filling the doorframe, "you've finally come home." I stumbled backward, my hand fumbling for the silver knife in my pocket. "What do you want from me?" I demanded, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. "Why did you kill my family? Why did you spare me?" The creature's lips curled back in a snarl that might have been a smile. "You ask many questions, little David. But do you really want the answers? Are you prepared for the truth?" "Tell me," I shouted, my voice echoing through the empty house. The werewolf took a step forward, its claws scraping against the wooden floor. "Very well. I killed your family because they were trying to protect you. From me. From your destiny." I shook my head, uncomprehending. "What are you talking about? What destiny?" "You are one of us, David," the creature growled. "Or you should have been. Your parents knew the truth about your bloodline, about the curse that runs through your veins. They thought they could hide you from it, could keep you from becoming what you were meant to be. I couldn't allow that." The world seemed to tilt around me. This couldn't be true, it couldn't be. "You're lying," I whispered. "Am I?" the werewolf asked, taking another step closer. "Haven't you always felt different? Haven't you always known deep down that you didn't belong in the human world?" Memories flashed through my mind. The strange urges I'd sometimes felt, the dreams of running wild under the moon, the inexplicable strength and speed I'd occasionally displayed. All my life I dismissed these things, told myself they were just imagination. But now, "If what you're saying is true," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady, "then why didn't you turn me that night? Why leave me human?" The creature's eyes narrowed. "The transformation must be willingly accepted. It cannot be forced. I left you alive so that when the time came, when you were ready to embrace your true nature, you would come to me." "And you think I'm ready now?" I asked, my grip tightening on the silver knife. The werewolf's mouth opened in a grotesque approximation of a smile. "I think you're closer than you've ever been. I can smell the change in you, David. The human part of you is weakening. Soon, very soon, you'll be ready to join us." "Us?" I repeated. "There are more of you?" "Of course," the creature growled. "Did you think I was alone? We are a pack, David. A family. The family you were always meant to have." My mind was reeling. This was too much. Too impossible to believe. And yet, a part of me, a part I had always tried to ignore, resonated with the werewolf's words. "No," I said, shaking my head. "No, I won't become like you. I won't be a monster." The werewolf's eyes flashed with anger. "You don't have a choice, David. It's in your blood. You can run, you can hide, but you can't escape what you are. And the longer you deny it, the more painful your transformation will be." With a roar, the creature lunged forward. I dove to the side, feeling the rush of air as its claws barely missed me. I scrambled to my feet, running for the door, my heart pounding in my ears. Behind me, I could hear the werewolf's snarling pursuit. I burst out of the house, sprinting down the overgrown path towards my car. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get them into the ignition. Just as I heard the creature burst out of the house, I managed to start the car. I slammed it into gear and peeled away, the tires screeching on the pavement. In the rearview mirror, I saw the werewolf standing in the middle of the road, watching me go. Its howl of frustration and promise echoed through the night, sending shivers down my spine. As I sped back toward the city, my mind was in turmoil. Everything I thought I knew about myself, about my life, had been turned upside down. Was the creature telling the truth? Was I really destined to become like it? I gripped the steering wheel tightly, my knuckles turning white. No, I told myself, I wouldn't let it happen. I would find a way to break this curse, to escape this destiny the werewolf claimed I had. But deep down, in a part of myself I was afraid to acknowledge, I felt a stirring of something wild and ancient. And I knew that my battle was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. The following weeks were a nightmare of paranoia and internal struggle. Every shadow seemed to hide a lurking beast. Every unexpected sound made me jump. But worse than the external threats were the changes I began to notice in myself. My senses became sharper, almost painfully so. Scents I had never noticed before assaulted my nose. Sounds I shouldn't have been able to hear reached my ears. My strength and speed increased, to the point where I had to be careful not to accidentally hurt someone with a casual touch. And the dreams, God, the dreams were the worst. Night after night, I found myself running through dark forests, the taste of blood in my mouth, the thrill of the hunt singing in my veins. I would wake up gasping, my sheets soaked with sweat, both terrified and exhilarated. I knew I was changing, becoming something other than human. The werewolf's words echoed in my mind. You don't have a choice, David. It's in your blood. But I refused to accept it. I would find a way to stop this, to cure myself before it was too late. My research took on a frantic edge. I delved into ancient texts, obscure folklore, anything that might give me a clue about how to break the werewolf curse. I found mentions of rituals, of rare herbs and arcane symbols that were said to have power over lycanthropy. But every potential cure came with a warning. The closer one was to fully transforming, the more dangerous and painful the cure would be. And I could feel that I was getting closer every day. It was during this time that I made a decision that would change everything. I couldn't face this alone anymore. I needed help, someone to watch over me, to stop me if I couldn't stop myself. I reached out to Sarah, my ex-girlfriend. We had broken up a year ago, driven apart by my increasing obsession with the supernatural, but she was the only person I felt I could trust with this. To my surprise, she agreed to meet me. We sat in a quiet corner of a coffee shop, and I told her everything. About the werewolf, about my family's murder, about the curse that was slowly taking over my body. I expected her to laugh, to call me crazy, to walk away. Instead, she listened quietly, her face growing more serious with each word. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment. I always knew there was something different about you, David, she finally said. I never would have guessed this, but I believe you. Relief washed over me. Then you'll help me? She nodded, reaching across the table to take my hand. Of course. What do you need me to do? I squeezed her hand gratefully. I think I've found a ritual that might cure me, but it's dangerous, and if it doesn't work, if I start to transform, I need you to... I swallowed hard. I need you to use this. I slid a silver dagger across the table. Sarah's eyes widened as she looked at the weapon. David, I can't... Please, I begged. I can't risk hurting anyone. If I become that thing, I need you to stop me. Promise me, Sarah. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. When she opened them again, there was determination in her gaze. I promise, she said softly. We spent the next few days gathering the components for the ritual. Rare herbs, blessed silver, candles made from the fat of a black dog. The list was as gruesome as it was bizarre. But finally, we had everything we needed. We decided to perform the ritual in the abandoned house where my family had been killed. It felt right somehow to end this where it had all begun. As we entered the decaying building, a sense of foreboding washed over me. The air seemed thick with malevolence, as if the very walls remembered the horror that had occurred here. We set up in what had once been the living room, arranging the candles and herbs in a complex pattern on the floor. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the broken windows, we began the ritual. Sarah read from an ancient text while I stood in the center of the pattern, my body trembling with a mixture of fear and anticipation. The words of the ritual were in a language I didn't understand, but they seemed to resonate in my very bones. As the last light of day faded, I felt something stir within me. It was the beast, the wolf, rising to the surface. I gritted my teeth, fighting against the transformation with every ounce of my will. Pain racked my body. I could feel my bones trying to shift, my muscles stretching and contorting. I fell to my knees, a scream tearing from my throat. "David!" Sarah cried, her voice filled with fear. "Keep going," I gasped. "Don't stop, no matter what happens." She nodded, her voice shaking as she continued to recite the words of the ritual. The candles flickered wildly, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The herbs began to smoke, filling the air with an acrid scent that burned my sensitive nose. And then, just when I thought I couldn't take anymore, just when I felt the wolf about to break free, something changed. The pain intensified, becoming almost unbearable. But it was different now. It felt like something was being torn out of me, ripped away at the cellular level. I screamed, my back arching as waves of agony washed over me. And then suddenly it was over. I collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. Sarah rushed to my side, her hands fluttering over me uncertainly. David, are you okay?" Slowly, painfully, I sat up. I felt different. The constant presence of the wolf, the wildness that had been growing inside me was gone. I felt wholly, blessedly human. I think," I said, my voice hoarse, "I think it worked." Sarah's face broke into a relieved smile. She threw her arms around me and I hugged her back, feeling tears of joy and relief spring to my eyes. But our celebration was short-lived. A low, menacing growl echoed through the room, freezing the blood in my veins. We turned slowly to see the werewolf standing in the doorway, its eyes blazing with fury. "What have you done?" it snarled. I stumbled to my feet, pushing Sarah behind me. "It's over," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. "Your curse is broken. I'm free." The creature's face contorted with rage. "You fool!" it roared. "You think you can escape your destiny so easily? You've only delayed the inevitable." It lunged forward with terrifying speed. I dove to the side, pulling Sarah with me. We scrambled across the room, desperately searching for a way out. The werewolf turned, its claws leaving deep gouges in the wooden floor. Its eyes locked onto Sarah, and I saw the hunger there, the desire to rend and tear. "No!" I shouted, throwing myself between them. I expected to feel claws tearing into my flesh, but instead I felt a surge of strength. Without thinking, I lashed out, my fist connecting with the werewolf's jaw with a satisfying crunch. The creature stumbled back, shock evident in its eyes. I stood my ground, my hands clenched into fists, ready to fight to the death if necessary. But the werewolf didn't attack again. Instead, it regarded me with a mixture of anger and, was that respect? "This isn't over, David," it growled. "You can't run from what you are forever. Sooner or later, you'll come back to us, to your true family." And with that, it turned and bounded away, disappearing into the shadows of the abandoned house. Sarah and I stood there for a long moment, our hearts pounding, scarcely able to believe we were still alive. Finally, she turned to me, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. "David," she said softly, "your eyes." I blinked, suddenly aware of a strange sensation. My vision seemed sharper, more acute. I walked over to a broken mirror hanging on the wall and peered at my reflection. My eyes had changed. They were no longer their usual brown, but a bright, piercing gold, the eyes of a wolf. I stumbled back, a chill running down my spine. The ritual had broken the curse, had stopped my transformation, but it hadn't removed the wolf entirely. A part of it was still inside me, would always be inside me. As Sarah and I left the house, heading back to the relative safety of the city, I knew that this was far from over. The werewolf was still out there, still hunting me, and the wolf inside me, while subdued, was not gone. I had won this battle, but the war was far from over. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my core, that the next full moon would bring new challenges, new dangers. But for now, I was alive, I was human, and I was determined to stay that way, no matter what it took. As we drove away from the house, leaving behind the scene of so much horror and triumph, I made a silent vow. I would find a way to end this, once and for all. I would protect myself, protect Sarah, protect everyone from the monsters that lurked in the shadows of Detroit.